Okay, great. I think we can probably get started then. So first of all, a very warm welcome to all of you for joining us on today's webinar. Today is launch day for the Sandpiper Global Reputation Capital Index, which is going to look closely at how organizations and leaders are managing reputation at a time of considerable disruption. My name is Arun Sudham, and I'm editor-in-chief of Provoke Media. We're really happy to be partnering with Sandpiper on this research again. I think you'll find from this webinar that some of the findings truly are fascinating and reflect the quite complicated times in which we live, particularly for those of you who are entrusted with managing, protecting, and enhancing reputation. Um, so in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Sandpiper's Chief Operating Officer, Kelly Johnston, to take us through the research findings. But before that, I just wanted to quickly introduce our wonderful panel who are going to discuss the findings. From Airbus, we have Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Chief Representative, Stephen Forshaw. We have Miki Hirasawa Ashton, who's Global Manager for Sustainability Engagement at 3M. And we have Alex Malouf, who is a Senior Director of Public Relations and Media from the government of Saudi Arabia. So welcome to all the panelists. And with that said, I think, Kelly, I'll hand over to you. Just one quick housekeeping note, actually, before I do that. This session will run for the next 57 minutes. If you do want to ask questions at any point of the panelists, you can, I think, use the Q&A functionality. It's probably the best thing we would advise. And we'll try to ensure that your question is asked before the end of the session. So, Kelly, over to you.
Thank you, Arun. So our research comprises two parts. Just go to the first slide. And essentially, so we've used the research to gather insights on both the reputation landscape as well as to gather data points to build a global index. So the research covers 2,700 respondents globally based across 27 different markets. They work in the headquarters for their companies, the global headquarters. Of companies with minimum 100 employees and turnover of no less than 50 million. There are 12 industry sectors represented. So if we look firstly at the reputation landscape, we see that there's widespread recognition that reputation, firstly, is important to commercial success, with 97% indicating this globally. However, when we look at those rating it as very important, this drops away quite a bit, suggesting that there is still more work to be done to push the case for investment of more time and energy into reputation management. Given the audience on this webinar today is largely based in Asia Pacific and the Middle East, we have included breakout findings for these regions throughout the presentation. You can see from this that Middle East and Asia Pacific, and Africa rates significantly higher than other regions. On the other side of the slide, our findings show that there is a feeling that organizations are keeping pace, with 97% perceiving that their reputational standing is similar or better than their peers. Now, anyone that knows anything about statistics knows that this just can't be correct, and our research also shows this to be otherwise. Another trend that we see throughout the research, and which is shown here, is a wide divergence of views of reputation across executive teams, with CEOs, other C-suite members, and corporate affairs leaders all sharing divergent views. In this instance, CEOs are much more likely to feel a high level of responsibility for reputation than other executives, including corporate affairs leaders. However, our analysis shows that organizations with high responsibility corporate affairs leaders do perform much better across almost every other area of our research and index. As well as part of looking at the reputation landscape, we've also taken a bit of a dive into the 6 pillars of reputation that Sandpiper has been studying through our global research over the past 5 years. And there's many findings around this, but I guess the key takeaway is that all areas continue to be important. Corporate and financial performance and product and service offering clearly lead, but other areas are strong and seen as important too. So a holistic approach is really required. By some margin, respondents rate their organization's strongest in corporate and financial performance and weakest in citizenship across the board globally, with some differences by region. For example, in the Middle East and Africa, leadership and governance is in fact the weakest and not citizenship. In an increasingly difficult geopolitical environment, we see that geography is also playing a role in reputation, but, and to some surprise, the vast majority of respondents view the geographic location of their headquarters positively. When looking at risks and impacts, 3/4 of respondents' organisations have experienced negative business impacts as a result of reputational weaknesses in the past 12 months, with the leading one being hindering its ability to do business with customers or certain markets. Further to this, we see a wide variety of reputational risks on the rise. And I'm sure you've read many reports and read many articles about these in recent times. And 6 out of 10 respondents, as a result, say their reputation is becoming more difficult to manage in this environment. The top issues of concern are the rise of misinformation and disinformation and data and cybersecurity issues, though we see that 9 out of 10 are concerned, or very concerned, in fact, about almost all of these issues. And we see a large gap between concern and preparedness, with the largest gap being between concern and preparedness being misinformation and disinformation, as well as employee activism. Lastly, and it probably goes without saying, that access to insights is seen and found in our research as a major driver of success. Our data shows a very strong correlation between having strong insights and being able to successfully engage and influence audiences. So those are some top-line findings from the state of the environment for reputation management, and now we'll move on quickly to the index. So in total, there are 51 variables that we assessed in order to build our global index that are based, and those 51 variables are spread across 9 different areas of reputation management. And essentially within this, we have built an index for each area, as well as an overall performance based index. Again, we see this gap between importance and strength. So at a sort of a high level, all of our respondents rated each area of reputation management as important, more than 8 out of 10. But again, we see this drop away between then taking action on that, with less than half, at the most 45%, feeling that they have strong preparedness in any of these areas, or performing strongly in any of these areas. So we'll now take I'll take a very quick, give you a very quick snapshot of some of the highlight findings of each area of the reputation index. And you'll see that essentially what we have done in building this is identified 4 categories based on performance, the scores across those 51 variables that I mentioned earlier. So the top category being trailblazers, who scored consistently high across all areas of reputation management. Aspirants scored high across most areas. Followers scored high across some areas, and beginners scored low across or didn't rate across most areas. Just to give you that context. So in terms of reputation strategy, essentially here we see this was actually the second highest performing area of the index. Most have in place a reputation strategy. They have clear ownership, but there is not, one of the areas that was a weak spot here is that there wasn't strong alignment with narrative and messaging, with corporate strategy, or key aspects of the organization's direction, like vision, mission, values, or purpose. And that translated into a feeling that key audiences of the organization weren't really engaged in its narrative or had a high understanding of it. ESG and sustainability strategy, on the flip side, was the worst performing area in the index. So less than half have ESG or sustainability strategy or targets. A strong correlation is seen here with whether an organization has invested in actually having a dedicated internal sustainability team. Very surprisingly, only 13% do. Another area of gross underpreparedness is in climate communications and messaging. And crisis and issues management, so this is the area which actually organizations performed the best. So most have a crisis and issues management plan in place, less are confident of using it. But there was one of the aspects that pushed this up was the regular approach to training and revisiting crisis and issues management plans. Executive profiling and thought leadership. One of the lower areas, so alongside media engagement, which I'll go through shortly, which was surprising. So very high ratings for the effectiveness of executive profiling and thought leadership activities, with the highest area of effectiveness being in building trust. But while most organizations felt that they had a clear thought leadership strategy in place with topics and themes, only 38% felt that their organization is actually recognized as an industry thought leader. And one of the key correlations driving that downwards is actually frequency of thought leadership activities. So those that were more frequently engaging and delivering a wide range of thought leadership activities were more likely to rate their organization as a thought leader. In terms of media engagement, this was, as a former journalist myself, this was a very interesting one. We see, which I would totally agree with, 69% believe that they are not engaging with the media enough. And sort of mixed responses around media training and whether that should be mandatory. Only 46% actually make training for spokespeople mandatory, but that did show through in some of the results, with 74% believing that the quality of their spokespeople could be improved as a result of not engaging with media enough. And not having spokespeople that had been sufficiently trained. A whopping 2/3 did not feel, around 2/3 do not feel that journalists are treating them fairly or portraying their organizations accurately. Now, those that are engaging with media more are less likely to have this issue. In terms of AI and digital profile, this area scored around the middle. Still low general understanding of generative AI and how it's influencing digital content, and a range of issues driving concern in this area, including, again, misinformation, quality control of AI content, and manipulated media and deepfakes. And employee communications. There's a lot of activity happening here with organisations on average using 11.6 internal communications channels on average, but this isn't translating into results. Only 40% feel that their communications and human resources teams are highly aligned in their strategies. And the same number feel that their employees actually have a strong understanding of their corporate strategy. What we're really seeing here is the need to focus on having better channels, not more channels, and stronger internal alignment. In terms of financial communications, only less than half believe that their organisation's value is well understood. Those that are more effective in communicating financial results and performance were less likely to indicate this, and just 39% felt very satisfied with performance and capital raising. So despite feeling, if you correlate that back to the earlier point, despite feeling quite happy with their performance in corporate and financial as a pillar of reputation, corporate performance and financial performance, actually, when we get down into the individual aspects of that, issues emerge. Lastly, government and regulatory affairs. So while most have attempted some form of stakeholder mapping, almost half are not doing this comprehensively. There is a feeling that more should be done across the board to engage with policy activity. And again, we see issues that respondents correlate with failure to engage, that this has negative, so 75% have been negatively impacted by this in the past 24 months. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour of the index. There are thousands of data points that make this up, and we'll be sharing this tomorrow morning, and welcome you to have a read and share any questions with us. Back to you, Arun.
Thanks very much, Kelly. Yeah, some really fascinating findings, and there is a lot more data in the report. So I would urge everyone to get hold of a copy or read the full findings. But certainly plenty for us to discuss on today's session. I think maybe if we can start with one of the findings, perhaps one that jumps out to many of us. A consistent theme, I think, in the research is that there is perhaps what you could describe as a strategy to action gap. So, for example, more than nine out of 10 believe all areas of reputation are important, but less than half of the respondents rate their organization's reputation for these areas as strong. And at the same time, there's sometimes it seems like maybe there's a sense of disempowerment. Only 67% of CEOs and 50% of corporate affairs leaders feel a high level of responsibility for their organization's reputation. And of course, we do have some corporate affairs leaders on this panel. So let me start by asking the panelists why they think this might be in terms of these findings, and do these findings resonate with their own experiences? And in no particular order, perhaps I could start with you, Stephen. You're on mute.
Yes, sorry, I think I was put on mute. Not unusually for me. Good afternoon, and thanks to the Sandpiper team for making this research available. It's a good job as always. Look, in one sense, there's some good news in this, in that I don't see that people are being complacent about reputation. So the fact that there is this gap between what people perceive as important and where they are is actually not unhealthy. I think it gives people something to work on and make sure that they're aware that there's something around the corner that they need to continuously improve. The worry for me, the real worry for me, is the number that that sits against CEOs and particularly corporate affairs leads that think that that their own involvement in this is less important. Let me be very clear: reputation is absolutely fundamental to the success of business, and if you want to see your business go up in smoke, trash your reputation and see how long it lasts. Now, where does the responsibility sit with that? Now, it sits with everyone, but the CEOs need to accept that as the leaders of the firm, they bear the ultimate responsibility. And that number is 67% is actually alarming to me. I get that a corporate affairs lead might say, well, my ability to influence the full sphere of reputation issues might be limited. Therefore, maybe it's not my job. But again, I think that might be a view. It's not a reasonable view in my mind. I look at corporate affairs leaders to own this, whether they can influence it or not, to use their influence, to use their voice, to be the champion of reputation. In an organization, we have experts in finance who can rise to become the chief financial officer. You have an expert in the law that can become your general counsel. You have an expert in sales who become your chief marketing or chief commercial officer. Who is your chief reputation officer? That is the corporate affairs domain. So, people in our function own that. And if they're not prepared to take it on and aspire to do something with it, then get out of the way and let people come in who will. So there's a very clear message in this. The way I read this data is that we have half the people in these functions who are not aspirational enough for what their function means and what they need to bring to the table. And if you don't have a seat at the table, if you aren't parts of these conversations, then I can assure you that you're very much part of the menu rather than part of the conversation. So get out of the way and let others get involved who can.
Okay, well, that's a strong response to get us started. Certainly, they are striking findings, and as Stephen mentioned, somewhat alarming and perhaps even unreasonable. Mickey, how do you see it in terms of these findings, the level of responsibility that corporate affairs leaders and CEOs feel for their organization's reputation?
So thank you, Aaron, Kelly, and Sandpiper for the invitations. I'm very, very happy to be on this panel and exchange a bit what we think. So I think, so I'd like to just first add a point to Stephen. I do believe that corporate affairs has a responsibility in leading that conversation, definitely. But perhaps, like the strategy to action gap that I found in reputation management is often a multifaceted issue. As in, from my perspective, it is mainly a stakeholder engagement issue. It cannot be just led by the CEO or by the corporate affairs organization. It also needs to kind of involve different kind of moving parts of the organization. Um, I can understand the overwhelmingness, in fact, to go back to the disempowered feeling of the CEO in the corporate affairs, as this collective effort can sometimes feel like herding cats, right? Making it challenging to maintain a consistent and coordinating action. But I think one of the things that we misunderstand is reputation is not owned just by corporate affairs, right? I think reputation works best when the leaders, as well as the employees, right, the entire organization kind of owns the entire process, and I'll discuss that a bit later. But I think also the other thing that we need to understand is that reputation is a long-term game. Many companies operate on a quarter-to-quarter basis, right? So often corporate affairs actually is very limited in resources, right? So that's another reality we have. So we don't always have the adequate budget or the executive support to actually lead, like whatever activities we believe, is priority. And that is often because of course, of a lack of clear metrics or returns, right? Like, how do we as corporate affairs leader, okay, go to a CEO who actually see us 90% of the time as a cost line on the P&L, right? To actually justify that we need more investment to actually increase or manage a reputation. And whereas I think it is clearly understood what it can cost if we damage our reputation to the company, I think they still do not understand what it can actually kind of return to the company if we actually invest in reputation. So I think this finding definitely resonate with what I go through and I personally experience. So both on my previous role, but also in my current role. And probably I'll talk about sustainability a bit more later.
Sure. Thanks, Mickey. Yeah. So, some clear systemic barriers, perhaps, that you've identified, not least budgets and metrics. Alex, how do you see it?
I feel a little bit in awe following Stephen and Mickey with the Aussie punch at the beginning, and then Mickey's insights in terms of how she sees it at 3M. I think first things first is if you're going to be a CEO, you've got to realize that you are the face of the organization. We all wish we could work with, again, I'm not saying it because of Stephen's on the call, but we all wish we could work with someone like Richard Branson, who gets how to build reputation through being the face and through engaging with media. But some of us end up with, someone who's probably more like Elon Musk in terms of, how they deal with audiences, put it very bluntly. And others, I've worked with CEOs who just don't want to communicate. And the problem is people want to put a face to an organization. We are humans. We have not been replaced yet by AI and won't be hopefully for some time. So, if you want to be a leader of any organization, you've got to realize that you have to get out. You've got to communicate with your stakeholders, with your employees, with your customers, with the public, with government, with regulators, with suppliers, whoever it may be. So that's the first thing, and I think more potential CEOs need to be asked that, are you happy doing this? Because it is something that you've got to do. I remember one company that my wife worked for many years ago, and they actually had in their KPIs that executives had to go out and do media engagements, which I think many of us probably would like, even more of, just to get them out there and actually be front and center. I think the other sort of striking takeout from the survey as well is the amount of things that communicators are being asked to do. It is scary how many things we have to do today. I think for many of us, we still face issues in terms of budgets. We'd love to have obviously more money, who wouldn't? And also more people, but we're not going to often get that. So how do we try and do more with the same, or even more with less? And I think that's something that we've really got to think long and hard about. What do we prioritize? What do we push back and diplomatically say no to? And how do we try and make it all work for the betterment of both who we work for and also as well for society?
Yeah, absolutely. So the lowest performing area, if we look at the index globally, is actually ESG and sustainability strategy. And I think not only is it the lowest performing area of the index, but I think, what is it, only 29% of the organization surveyed have a climate comm strategy. And so how worried should we be about this? And I wonder how each of you is kind of addressing this particular challenge, whether you have any particular advice you could perhaps give to corporate affairs leaders. Mickey, perhaps I can start with you on this one.
Sure. So, to be honest, I'm not surprised. It is unfortunate, and it is a sad state of affairs. Recently, 19 states were signing in the US to go against ESG reporting. I don't know if you recall, that was around Q2, I think, of this year. And so I am not certain that this number will actually improve in the future. And it's really a polarizing kind of conversation, ESG, right? Because it comes with a lot of constraints, it comes with a lot of budget, yet we also recognize the need to actually kind of address the public opinion around this. So I think I needed to put that back in context. So at 3M, we seem to be going against the current. Since the 70s, we do understand what is the cost of not, of course, of actually doing the right thing in terms of ESG integration, but also not doing it because, of course, we are like any multinational. And so leading in sustainability is definitely one of our strategic pillars, right? Like we really embedded it. We embed it in our sustainable value commitment through every single products that we have, for instance. And also, because reputation is not just what you say, it's also what you do, right? So we have 100% of our products on sustainability value commitment, the new ones. Okay. And I think the other issue that comes from it is the breadth and the complexity of ESG, right? I think most companies, especially the smaller one, find it very difficult to embed it. And I was sitting at the UN GC panel the other day, and we were really discussing on how for a bigger company, because we're more established, because we have more means, it is easier to implement those, right? Because we have actually started the journey earlier. But for smaller companies, implementing it is a very, very big cost. Do you have enough money to spare 2 or 3, headcounts in your budget just on sustainability alone, right? The second thing is it is a very complex issue. It's not very understood that sustainability is not just around environment, right? This is the other thing. It's also encompasses social and government. And so I think uh, my entire experience with executive around ESG is that we need to actually bypass the bad reputation that ESG has. So I mentioned it earlier around, like that cost line on a P&L, but also I think to address the communication through communications, I think there is a big, big play that we have as corporate affairs. So I'll give you an example that happened at 3M. In MEA, where initially my country was from, we had all the MDs of every subsidiary saying to the sustainability team, "We know you do a lot of things, right? Like you do a lot of things in sustainability. We have no clue what you do." And so that's quite of a brutal conversation to have, but it is because, like sustainability in multinational is often owned by different pillars. So at 3M, we have sustainability in the businesses, we have sustainability in, I don't know, in manufacturing, we have sustainability in EHS, we have sustainability as corporate where I belong to. And so to address this, what I have started is called something called 17 weeks to COP. So the goal was an employee engagement advocacy program. Why 17 weeks? Because there are 17 United Nations, like sustainable development goals. So that was to educate the organization around what sustainability is, one SDG at the time, one SDG per week until COP, because we needed to explain why we're actually going to COP, which was not always clear. And what we did is we engaged all the communicators. So to Stefan's point earlier, we actually engaged every single communicators of the country. They all own a few SDGs. And we actually took all the public proof points by country and actually kind of created all those proof points so that all the MDs were actually geared toward understanding what we were doing, what sustainability was about, and how they can actually communicate. So, for instance, if you want to communicate around, like, I don't know, governance, right? You know exactly what we did for Ukraine, how we actually supporting the efforts in terms of DNI. And that's because, like by SDG, we can actually combine them under, like governance or I don't know, like environment. And this actually really, really helped, the entire communication of the SDG. I think my personal goal is to explore how we can better communicate that value. Okay, so now we understand it is important to impact the bottom line, and I'm starting my PhD on this like next month. So that's pretty
Okay.
much.
Well, we'll look forward to the results of that too, because perhaps those will be quite instructive. Um, Alex, what are your thoughts? Does it surprise you, the ESG and sustainability findings?
Probably not. I think we're all believing that we are probably doing much more than we should be doing. And I think also as well, the challenge is the bigger challenge with sustainability is how do you define it? Every person, every company has a different definition, and that's the same with ESG. I think the environmental one is probably easier to look at, but then if you look at societal, that's much more of a challenge. But even environmental has been politicized. If you look at it, especially with what is happening in, for example, North America. So I think, simply put, it is something that we've got to really think long and hard about, because we are going to see the impact of climate change and societal shifts in a very big way over the coming couple of years. We're already seeing it in terms of Asia Pacific, with many of the islands that, what is going to happen to them in 10, 15, 20 years. What is really interesting is when you look at different societies, and I love to see the results from Sandpiper in terms of where places like Western Europe, where you have a lot of regulations and rules regarding greenwashing. What I may suspect to be the case is that if you look at, say, somewhere like Western Europe, where there's a lot of regulations and a very active civil society, you're going to see organizations saying they're not doing as much. Whereas maybe in the Middle East and Africa, you're probably seeing organizations saying they're doing a lot. And that's possibly as well because we don't have the societal pressures on us that other markets would do. So yeah, I'm going to delve into the survey and see what it does say about that.
So Stephen, obviously, both Alex and Mickey have mentioned, increasing politicization of this area with the sort of anti-woke lobby, let's call it. But then also there's a question from the floor about whether companies are green hushing and actually actively playing down their environmental initiatives to avoid accusations of greenwashing. But how do you see all of those concerns coming together in terms of how organizations are addressing ESG and sustainability, particularly in terms of how it relates to their reputation?
Yeah, look, 2 points I would make in opening on this. I think the points that my fellow panelists just made, I echo entirely. I think it's a hard journey. It's a difficult issue for companies to deal with, and to Mickey's point in particular about the way smaller companies unlock the resources in what is already a tightly contested and very competitive business environment to allocate cost to something that is very long-term against what they need to do just to survive the short term. I fully get that. And I think it is why you will see big global companies become the natural leaders in this, because they potentially have the balance sheet strength to be able to put a bit more into it, and a societal expectation that our companies will play a leadership role globally on these issues, particularly in areas where government might be abrogating or just not making decisions fast enough. Second point I would make is that this is a really hard issue, and I don't get too concerned when I see the number as low as it is, because I see aspiration there. I see companies want to do something. They're trying to work out how to, and this is where forums like this and the knowledge and insights gained from the networks that we all build together can help. Small steps initially can be very impactful, and they can also be done at low cost, but it means companies need to be looking at what is the future for them. What does the future look like in a carbon intensive world, and the impact that that's going to have on their business? And your investors are now looking to you to have solutions to this. So you can't ignore it, but I get that it's going to take a bit of time. The question in the chat that I just typed an answer to on greenwashing, I think is a really important issue. And I've actually been struggling a little bit with this question, because I've seen and read about a number of companies facing lawsuits because they described a pathway that they're taking to make their operations more sustainable, and for that, a civil society group or an activist throws a lawsuit on them because they have a difference of view about one particular element of that. I worry that we may stop companies having candid conversations about what they're actually doing for fear that those greenwashing lawsuits take over. And as the questioner said, we end up with green hushing. I want us to all be able to have candid conversation. We have to preface this with, it is going to be hard, we will stumble on the way to a decarbonised future because we're doing things that we've never done before. If the answer was easy, someone would have already done it. But we are trying, we are investing, we are making progress. We will have setbacks. I think as long as we have this candid conversation and the intent is truthful and honest, and not when we're not gilding, our own standing and our own reputation, then I think there needs to be an allowance for this. And I hope that the courts will recognise this. If the courts don't recognise this, it may be up to parliaments to make statutory intervention to require that these conversations can be had on an open, honest, and good faith basis. I hope we don't get to that, but I also hope we don't get to the point where companies directly feel like they have to shut up for fear of a lawsuit.
Yeah, good point. And a good point also from Nikki Wright in the chat, who asked the original question, that we also see market leaders getting punished while the silent laggards retain reputation purity. So Stephen, I just want
that's really important, Arun, if I can just highlight
Yeah.
that, because I don't want to see companies that are at the vanguard of trying to do something hurt while the recalcitrants will sit back and just sit on their hands, do nothing, and not face any price for that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
if I
truly
can jump in with that, just to set on to what Stephen said, that's when you need leadership to step up and really have courage. You know, if that's what you believe in, if these are your values, if that's what you're going to do, you see it through. It's obviously harder if you're working at a publicly listed company, because there's every 3 months you've got the same pressures in terms of delivering. But just to me, I know I'm ex-P&G, but when I look at, say, Unilever, and what Paul Polman did, it was, and he did the sustainable living plan, 15, 20 years back. It was revolutionary. So you are going to get criticized, but if you believe in it, and you think it's good for your business and also for your employees and society, and you see it through, and you've got the results to show, then do it. You should just go through. Just don't take the criticism on the chin, and have the courage of your convictions in terms of this issue.
Sure. So Stephen, I'd like to stay with you for the next question. Actually, the research highlights a number of issues that leaders are concerned about, and that are making reputation management more complex. So things like misinformation, disinformation, geopolitics. Now, I think most of the leaders in the study say they have crisis and issues management strategies in place, but the findings also indicate gross unpreparedness to tackle these issues. And I'm curious to hear why you think this might be, and what perhaps people should be doing to better manage these issues in such a complex environment.
I think all of our speakers have emphasized today, including the earlier presentation, that the world in which we're expected to operate and the factors that drive reputation now are so much more complex. They're also moving at such great speed that we haven't seen before. And what used to be a very small local outbreak can become a global news story in literally minutes now, because of the amplification of social media, and worse, if that is then jumped on by the bot army, then you can be in a world of trouble before you've even woken up to it. I think when it comes to a crisis plan, I've always taken the view that you will prepare in a crisis plan for 5, 10, 1,000 eventualities. The eventuality that's going to hit you first will be the 6th or the 11th or the 1,001st. It'll be the one that you didn't plan for. And so where the planning for crisis is so important is about mindset rather than scenario. You can bog yourself down in thinking about scenarios and thinking about playbooks, but you've really got to get the mindset. So you form a set of values around your response. Those values are going to be things like: we tell the truth always, we are open and honest and clear with people about the impact. It's customer first, irrespective of cost to business in managing a crisis and helping people who are affected. Whatever your company may think are the appropriate values, I just pick a few there that seem to be fairly rational. if you have those right values and they're inculcated in the mindset of the leadership team and everyone who's responding, I think no matter what the scenario is, you'll get through it. If those values are properly calibrated, you test yourself on the values and work out what you're missing, you will get through a crisis. Crises will come and they will go. And the impression you leave on people is about how you managed it. Remember, organizations survive crises. Organizations do not survive the cover up after a crisis. So manage a crisis through a set of values rather than a scenario plan, and I think you'll be a lot better off.
Yeah, it's very interesting advice, I think, because I suspect many organizations will still look at crisis management through this prism of how many issues can we prepare for, rather than accepting that actually you can't prepare for all of them. And as you put it, the values are what are going to see you through. Um, Alex, a question for you I wanted to ask about the shrinking newsroom, which I know is an issue that's close to your heart. Um, so leaders highlight concern about this. 69% of those surveyed say they are not engaging with the media enough. 66%, so two-thirds, believe journalists do not portray their organizations accurately. So how do you think leaders should be managing their reputation with the media?
I love it when people say that the journalist is not showing our proper side. Or, the journalist, the whole point of an engagement with the journalist is the journalist to, to report on what they believe is accurate and proper. It's not to basically run your press release. It really pains me because, look, I'm a former journalist, very much a journalist at heart. I think, in many ways, the media, journalists and professionals are the filter that we miss on social media. They're the people that put things into perspective. They're the people who do the fact checking, and they're the people who, come back with the insights that can drive opinion. I do think that we need to be more comfortable in many markets in terms of taking a step forward and engaging, being comfortable with the risk element. It sort of astounds me that people don't want to engage with the media because they think there may be a risk in terms of the journalist saying something which they don't like. But again, that's their job. How do we encourage good journalism? Look, obviously, we've got to support investment in journalism as well. It's no secret that the industry is suffering just because there is much less money in it. A lot of the money which went into media has gone now into digital channels, social media. But for me, they are a fundamental pillar of how we engage with our audiences. And I'm old enough to think about when we used to get a hit in a daily or in a magazine newspaper, and it was it was always something that you would enjoy. I would always enjoy bringing in a good journalist and having a strong Q&A with them, because it would mean that we would also up our game as well.
Yep.
So I do think that we've got to think long and hard in terms of how we as an industry support the media. I think we're going to be much worse off without good, solid, independent media there. And it may be wonderful for the people to run our press releases, but again, we need to be challenged. We need people to come in and poke holes in our messaging and our message tracks, say this doesn't stack up, because as I said, they make us better as communications people and also as well as organizations and societies.
Yeah, 100%. No one is served, I don't think, by poor journalism. Mickey, I want to come to you next on some of the employee engagement findings. So, of course, we know employees are integral to organizational success, but there are some interesting findings here. So, first of all, what is it? The average number of internal comms channels is 12 per organization, which is an interesting one. And the research also shows that, and this I know is a bugbear of comms people everywhere, that communications and human resources, HR, are not always aligned on employee engagement strategies. So, what's your advice for leaders in terms of staying focused and aligned when it comes to employee engagement, when it comes to driving employee advocacy? And I wonder if you might have any examples you can share.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for this great question. So I think that divide between who is owning employee communication and employee engagement, should it be with HR, should it be with corporate, is quite a subject that we have actually looked into. It is also a moving target, right? Like today, perhaps HR should actually own it. Tomorrow, perhaps corporate should own it. I think what leaders should do is to focus on fostering collaboration rather than competing interest. I think where it always fails is when HR and corporate have their own target and actually trying to lead on a conversation instead of coming together. So that's the first thing that I would say about this. So it doesn't matter who leads. I think it matters what is said and what we actually kind of engaging on. So of course I'm corporate affairs, so I have a parti pris, but I am also fortunate to work in a field that allows me to build, purpose platform, create tools for people and brands to be able to kind of advocate around sustainability or reputation altogether, right? Like, because this is what corporate does. We, of course, create the talking point, but we also create, like the platforms where you can, like express yourself. I think one of the things that we did at 3M that I really, really thought was good was to engage employees. Okay. I don't think, again, I was saying earlier that like reputation is not just the role of corporate affairs or CEO. It is something that is owned. Of course, like the CEO and the corporate affairs will be the Sherpas and leading reputation, and we would be owning this from that perspective. But I think the people who will be resonating that reputation and will bring more authenticity to what we say rather than, having your vision or mission statement on a paper is probably the employee, right? I trust more an employee saying, "Oh, I love my company," right? And it is a stupendous company. We do great thing. I would trust that more than actually probably seeing on paper, right? Just so at 3M we have found success in empowering employee and allowing employee-led initiative. And I wanted to talk about this because it's very recent. So we have what we call a sustainability council, which is purely led by employees who do not work in sustainability, okay, or communication. They all come from manufacturing, businesses, etc. And they use what we call the 3M 15% culture. So it's what we do is we actually allow to work 15% of our time on a project that has nothing to do with what our role encompasses, right? So they use that. So the employees use that to create what we call the job guides on how to embed sustainability in our various roles, right? So they became the advocate of sustainability on their own, right? And what was incredible is that project got recognized externally. So it was an internal project that was actually done by a sustainability council led by employees for employees, right? And to create, like more greening jobs or jobs that are more responsible in many ways, right? How can you, as a marketer, okay, embed sustainability? How can you, as a manufacturer, embed sustainability? And so I think that was to also echo our Chief Sustainability Officer, Gail Schuler, to say that anyways, at one point, we have to, and to Alex's point, I think, on what is the impact we have on society, every job will be a green job, right? It should be a green job. Like every job is a bit digital these days. So I think, like we have the hope that it's going to be like that. I think giving, and I'll finish on this, giving the employees a voice and sharing their initiative beyond the organization is critical. And so tomorrow, just giving you the heads up, we are going to premiere a docu-series on green jobs that features, our 3Mers working in jobs that are actually more sustainable. So empowering our employees, but beyond, like saying, well, please do advocate on our network, on LinkedIn, please advocate on customer, which is great. We should do that. but also empowering the employees to be actually viewed and seen and understood by a majority of stakeholders. So that will be actually played today, in fact, a bit later because it's US timing. And the docu-series is going to be by award-winning actor and producer Lana Condor. So that's pretty much what we actually did in terms of, driving advocacy, engagement, both from within and outside the organization.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, some really good examples there, and we will look forward to the launch of the docu-series. Okay, so we have 3 minutes left, which means with pleasing symmetry, I can give you each 1 minute to answer the final question, which is what are your closing comments, reflection, or advice when it comes to managing this increasingly complex landscape for reputation? So, Stephen, I'll come to you first if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks. Look, reputation at the end of the day is not something that we can control as an organization. It's inherently about how people view our behaviors, how people view the consistency of the actions, how people look at us when the lights are not on. We can have brand teams that work on what we want our organizations to be perceived as, but I will assure you, everyone out there forms a view about a company based on the things you don't want them to see rather than the things you do. So the important point here is when you're acting as a company to your customers, to your stakeholders, behave consistently in the way you want people to perceive you, and you will drive a positive reputation score. If you try too hard, though, then I think you're going to get too wound up and become inauthentic in the way you're perceived. So, be yourselves, but make sure that you're good selves, and reputation will follow.
Good and sage advice as always. Alex?
Look, the world is getting more complex. We know that. The job is getting more complex. Many of us also know that as well. But it's still fun. It's still really enjoyable, especially if you've got a crystal ball. You can make a lot of money with that. And also, I think, given what is happening around the world in terms of how everything is becoming polarized, we really are central to what organizations should be thinking about. Reputation drives your business, it drives your organization. It's like us as individuals. What do we want people to think about us? We need to think the same way about our organizations, and we need our leadership to do the same as well. So, keep fighting the good fight. It's always going to be a slog, but we are going to keep making inroads in terms of flying the flag for comms and what we need to be able to do as good a job as possible. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And Mickey, you get the final word.
Thank you. So my husband wrote in an article yesterday that leadership cannot operate in leadership. Reputation cannot operate as a vacuum. And I think what we perhaps didn't talk enough about is around collaboration as key to navigating, that increasingly complex and landscape of reputation, right? And Alex keep on saying our job is more complex, and it is. And I think our role is also establishing strong relationship with stakeholders, including customers, investors. I think Stephen mentioned government, right? And then ensure a robust support of network, right? Because I think reputation thrive in an environment of collaboration. I wrote around, like reputation borrowing and lending in the past, right? Like how coming together helps, like our common, like companies or government, like representation together, so we can elevate ourselves together. So definitely something around collaboration. And perhaps, like if I can invite you to, like join, I don't know, organizations such as the UNGC, and I don't get any perks of actually kind of promoting the UNGC or the American Chamber of Commerce, because I think those are really great platform that actually allows you to come together, solve complex problems, but also, help, like addressing, like those issues of greenwashing, or actually also, like promoting and amplifying what you're actually doing in terms of reputation.
Yeah, really good point to end on, Mickey. Thank you. So collaboration, complexity, and commitment. I think it's clear that these days a good reputation is harder than ever to earn, but not impossible, and incredibly valuable. As the research makes clear, and as per the very insightful comments from our panelists. So a big thank you to Alex, Stephen, and Mickey for their time and their thoughts today. And of course, a huge thank you to Kelly for presenting the Sandpiper research findings. Just a quick note that the full report will be available tomorrow. There'll be another presentation, I think tonight, or depending on what time zone you're in. And some of the findings are going to be presented at Provoke's Asia Pacific Summit tomorrow as well. And yeah, there is really a lot to get to in this report. So I strongly encourage you all to read it and think about it. So thank you all for your time. Take care and have a great rest of the day.